In Dynamic Ship Simulator 3, there are many ships, which should be a given considering it's a shipping game. However, in the early years of DSS3, many ships were made for various reasons, but are now nowhere to be found, and have been forgotten by a large majority of players. In this video, I'll be going over 18 different vessels that are slowly becoming more and more forgotten as time goes on. I figured I should start off with some of the most well-remembered ships featured in this video. The USS Iowa was one of 4 battleships that are no longer around. The USS Iowa was built and owned by Cutesy. Cutesy at the time was a moderator and is the person who made all of the ships in the Colonial Wind Game Pass, as well as a bunch of other smaller things. The USS Iowa was in its modernized state and did have a quite good model. In these photos, you can even see that the USS Iowa was able to turn its turrets. However, despite the Iowa's turrets being able to turn, they could not fire. In fact, none of the battleships had turrets that could fire. On screen now, you can see a bit of what the bridge looked like. The Bismarck was a ship built and owned by Homeless Gamba. The Bismarck arguably had the least amount of detail out of the 4 battleships, but nonetheless it was still a very iconic ship. Something I noticed about the Bismarck is that it did actually have at least 2 different variants. The first variant was this one, and the second variant was this one. On the second variant, you can see some extra detail has been added, most notably the anchors. The HMS Vanguard was made by Homeless Gamba, but was owned by Jorbunga. Similar to the Bismarck, there was again at least 2 variants. The first variant was quite bare, but on a later version there is a lot more detail present. The making of this ship is ultimately what led to the next ship existing in DSS3. The Yamato was another ship owned by Homeless Gamba. Gamba was allowed to have the ship due to the fact that he made the HMS Vanguard for Jorbunga. The Yamato had a ton of low poly detail throughout the ship. In terms of looks, I think this is tied with the USS Iowa as my favorite battleship to ever be in DSS3. I mean, just look at it. The Type 23 frigate was made by Jorbunga for the Island Nations roleplay, or INRP for shorts. Despite there being weaponry on the ship, none of it functioned. The model used in the INRP was pretty low quality. However, progress on a higher quality version had started, but due to issues with uploading the model to Roblox, it was unable to ever be added to DSS3. The Arleigh Burke class destroyer was another low quality warship model made for the INRP. Again, the weaponry on this ship did not function. The Bay-class landing ship was one of Yunno's personal ships. The ship itself was again made for the Isle Nations roleplay. Whenever this ship comes up in conversation, it's common for people to crack jokes about the ship's quality. Despite many other ships being on the same level of quality, this one in particular for some reason gets joked about the most. The Bay-class landing ship is actually currently in the plans section on the DSS3 developer roadmap. However, it's been in this section for well over a year now, so I think it's safe to say this ship won't be coming anytime soon, if at all. The HMS Hermes was made by Jorbunga around 2017 and was later used in the INRP. The Hermes was able to go 18 knots. On the flight deck, Harrier jump jets and Sea King helicopters could be found. This is what the horn sounded like. And this is what the alarm sounded like. In the background, you were able to see what the interior is like. This ship did obviously have working lights and navigation lights. Now, I'm not 100% sure how to say the name of this ship, but for this video, I will call it the Corcaigh. The Corcaigh was technically a fictional ship, but was based on the HMS Hermes. The ship belonged to Yunno. The Corcaigh is a bit confusing because there were 2 different versions of it. The first version was this version, R22, which was a helicopter carrier. You could see multiple helicopters on the flight deck as well as the missing ski jump. This is because this version was based on the HMS Hermes after the 50s but before the 80s. And due to the ski jump being a modification added in the early 80s, it is not visible on this version. You can also see that the Corcaigh has a quite large radar in comparison to the taller and skinnier radar seen on the Hermes. On the port side, you can see that there's even a bit of space for a hangar. On the second version, this space cannot be seen. The main version of the Corcaigh was this version, P01. This version was based on the HMS Hermes after her modifications in the 80s, since the ski jump is visible and the radar has been replaced. On the flight deck, you can see multiple helicopters and many Cessnas. On both versions of the Corcaigh, all of the rust seen on the HMS Hermes has been removed. In the Isle Nations roleplay, the Corcaigh ended up being sold. Before I talk about this ship, it should be noted that in real life, this is what the HMS Hermes was converted into after it was sold to India, so that's why it looks so similar to the HMS Hermes. The INS Viraat was an aircraft carrier used one time in the Island Nations roleplay. During the one time it was spawned, it was bombed in port and then was never used again. Due to the fact it was only spawned one time long ago, I was unable to find a photo of it in-game. However, in this picture of the Viraat in Roblox Studio, you can see that the green part of the flight deck has been changed to gray, the radar masts have been slightly modified, and the registration number has changed. The helicopters that were on the Hermes are not on this version, and the Harriers have changed positions. The Moskva-class Helicarrier was a ship owned by Yunno and was used in the INRP. The Moskva was a fairly low quality model and it had many severe hitbox issues. However, it did have enough detail to make it look quite cool. Its horn was also the same horn that the HMS Hermes had. The weaponry on this ship did not work. The Astute-class SSN is, as far as I know, the only non-public submarine to be used in the INRP. Like most of the other vessels used in the INRP, the sub was pretty low quality. However, it's not like you would really be seeing much of it anyways. A little fun fact about the submarine is that it was purchased for £5 in a model pack. This submarine was able to dive. The Veinticinco de Mayo was another aircraft carrier made for and used during the INRP. This ship had a pretty nice flight deck, and on that flight deck you could see multiple A4 Skyhawks and Étendard 4s. This ship had a top speed of 23.9 knots. The MV King Richard was another ship used during the Island Nations roleplay. This ship was a sort of hybrid between multiple gigantic oil tankers and does not represent just one. However, the length of the ship was the same length as the Knock Nevis/Seawise Giants. The ship's name actually comes from a real British bulk carrier, the MV King Richard. This ship lacked a lot of detail, but there was a decent amount of stuff throughout the middle of the ship. In the INRP, this ship was struck by the USS Antrim, an Oliver Hazard Perry class frigate. In about 70 minutes, the MV King Richard capsized and sunk stern first, leaving a field of oil in its place. On screen now, you can see a few photos of the wreck. The Scimitar-class patrol boat was a slightly modified version of the police boat, made to of course look like a Scimitar-class patrol boat. There were two versions of the Scimitar, both being exclusive skins for Jorbunga and Syntax Connoisseur. HMS Scimitar belonged to Jorbunga and HMS Sabre belonged to Syntax. Considering the Scimitar-class patrol boat was just a modified version of the police boat, the stats of it were more than likely the exact same as it. The most notable changes between the Scimitar and the normal police boat were that the colors were changed, pretty much all markings were removed, and the two machine guns were added at the stern. Both of the skins had different pennant numbers, and like in real life, HMS Scimitar was P284 and HMS Sabre was P285. Now I'm not going to lie, I really don't know much about this ship. This ship was very rarely spawned. In fact, I was only able to find one photo of it. The only information I really know about it is that the ship in the photo was called the USS Port Royal and the weaponry did not function. Oh, and it had working navigation lights, so that's something. The reason it was spawned in this photo was because the 3rd Rudin Convention was being held in the INRP. I wanted to put these next two vessels at the end of the video since these two are the most recent to go away on this list. I also wouldn't necessarily say that they're forgotten yet, but over time they most likely will be. The Charles de Gaulle was the reward for completing the Perseus quest. However, very few people ever actually completed the quest. Due to certain actions within the community, including but not limited to toxicity and exploiting, the quest ended up being removed. The few people who had completed the Perseus quest and had the Charles de Gaulle did receive 100 million credits as compensation. This ship did have a bridge and was the first ship to ever have teleportation doors. There were two of these doors. One would take you to the bridge and another one would take you to a lower deck. On the flight deck, you could see multiple Rafale fighter jets. Of course, this ship had all of the main features you could expect on any other normal ship, such as lights, navigation lights, a horn, and an alarm. The Charles de Gaulle had a top speed of 27.2 knots when upgraded to level 3. The Valkyrie II was an 85-foot racing cutter that belonged to Aerozine 50. The Valkyrie was a near sister ship of the HMY Britannia, so when one was spawned, the other was also usually spawned. The two main ways to tell the difference between the Valkyrie and the Britannia is that the Valkyrie has the red ensign at the stern and a blue and yellow racing flag atop the mast. while the Britannia has the British ensign at the stern and a red and blue racing flag atop the mast. The second way to tell the difference between the two is that the Britannia has a small cabin while the Valkyrie did not. This cutter was quite detailed and looked very nice. The Valkyrie was also quite fast, being able to go upwards of 20 knots and good sailing conditions. It also, in my opinion, had some of the best looking sails out of any vessel to ever be in the game. The Valkyrie also had a special sea shanty only shared with the Britannia. Obviously, the Valkyrie is no longer around, however the Britannia is. With the Valkyrie out of the way, that concludes my video on the often forgotten about ships of Dynamic Ship Simulator 3. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. My Discord server is also linked in the description for those of you who may be interested in joining. With that all being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all later. Bye!